There was a time when humans did not live by the clock, but by the sun, the fire, and the quiet signals of their own bodies. Nights stretched without numbers. Mornings arrived without alarms. Time was felt, not measured. Then, slowly, almost invisibly, gears began to turn. In dim workshops lit by candlelight, early clockmakers started engineering something far greater than machines. They were engineering rhythm itself, carving seconds out of silence, teaching pendulums to swing like breathing lungs, and training human lives to follow mechanical beats. But what happens when the body, ancient, organic, slow, is forced to synchronize with metal springs and ticking hands? Tonight, we drift into the rhythmic physics of clockmaking and the quiet story of how humanity's sleep, dreams, and sense of time were gently reshaped by the slow engineering of the clock. If slow histories and quiet mechanics help you rest, consider subscribing and let the pendulum carry you softly into the night. Long before the first gear ever turned, before pendulums learned to swing and bells learned to divide the day, human life moved to a softer rhythm, one that could not be wound, regulated, or hurried. Time, in those distant centuries, was not something peoples kept. It was something they had inhabited. Morning did not begin at a numbered hour. It arrived slowly, like breath returning to the body. Pale light would gather along the horizon, filtering through trees, across fields, over stone rooftops. Roosters, sensitive to the faintest shift in brightness, would stir before humans did. Birds followed, their calls layering into a natural crescendo that replaced any need for alarms. People woke not because they were told to, but because their bodies felt the world changing. The human circadian rhythm, that ancient biological clock encoded deep within the brain, synchronized naturally with the rising and setting of the sun. Melatonin rose as darkness settled. Cortisol gently increased as dawn approached. Without artificial light, without glowing screens, the body's chemistry flowed in harmony with celestial cycles that had governed life for millions of years. In agrarian villages, mornings unfolded gradually. Farmers stepped outside to gauge the day not by minutes, but by sensations. The coolness of the air, the color of the sky, the position of shadows stretching across the soil. A cloudy morning felt different from a clear one. Winter light moved slower than summer light. People adjusted instinctively. Labor itself was elastic. Work began when visibility allowed and paused when heat, darkness, or fatigue suggested rest. In summer, long daylight hours stretched productivity naturally. In winter, shorter days invited longer evenings of stillness. No whistle signaled the start. No clock punished lateness. Effort expanded and contracted with the breathing patterns of the planet. Midday was not a fixed point either. It was sensed through the sun's height, the shortening of shadows beneath one's feet. Meals were taken when hunger aligned with opportunity, often after morning tasks, sometimes later if weather demanded urgency. But it was night that revealed the most intimate difference between ancient time and modern time. When darkness fell, it was absolute. Without electric illumination, night transformed the world completely. Villages dissolved, it into silhouettes. Pathways vanished. The sky expanded heavy with stars. Firelight flickered inside homes, casting moving shadows along walls, a soft, living glow that never fully replaced the sun's clarity. People did not stay awake long after darkness deepened. Candle wax was expensive. Oil was precious. Firewood required labor. Light, therefore, was rationed carefully. Most communities settled into sleep only a few hours after sunset. Yet this sleep was not the uninterrupted block modern societies expect. Historical records, medical writings, court testimonies, and personal diaries all reveal a pattern now called for segmented sleep. Though to those living it, it was simply normal life. People experienced what they called the first sleep. They would lie down on straw mattresses, wool pallets, or simple wooden frames layered with cloth. The body, tired from physical labor and guided by darkness, drifted quickly into deep rest. For 3 to 5 hours, villages fell into near total silence, broken only by wind, animals, or the shifting timbers of cooling homes. Then, sometime near midnight, people woke. Not abruptly. Not anxiously. They surfaced from sleep the way one surfaces from water, slowly, calmly, without urgency. This waking period could last an hour, sometimes two. It was not considered insomnia. It was expected. Husbands and wives spoke quietly in bed. Some prayed. Others reflected on dreams, believing the midnight interval held spiritual openness. Monks and clergy often scheduled prayer vigils precisely during this window, seeing it as sacred time between worlds. Neither day nor night, neither waking nor dreaming. In rural homes, individuals sometimes rose briefly to tend fires, check livestock, or step outside beneath the stars. The night sky, unobscured by pollution, stretched vast and luminous. Many described it as calming rather than eerie. A cosmic ceiling that encouraged contemplation. There are accounts of neighbors visiting one another during this midnight waking, sharing hushed conversations by embers. In warmer regions, people might sit outside, letting cool air settle the body before returning to rest. Eventually, drowsiness returned naturally. This second descent into sleep, the second sleep, carried people gently toward dawn. Dreams during this phase were often reported as more vivid, more narrative, perhaps because the mind had already processed the day's immediate fatigue. The body, in this segmented rhythm, received rest in two nourishing waves rather than one continuous stretch. Morning then arrived not as an interruption, but as completion. Seasons layered additional texture onto this organic sense of time. In summer, sleep shortened. Heat lingered into evening, and dawn arrived early. People adapted, often resting briefly during midday shade. A proto-siesta shaped not by culture alone, but by solar intensity. In winter, darkness expanded. Nights lengthened dramatically, especially in northern regions. People slept longer, sometimes 9 or 10 hours across both sleep phases. Even waking hours felt muted, voices softer, movements slower, as if the world itself honored the sun's retreat. Festivals, markets, and communal events clustered around seasonal light abundance. Winter invited storytelling, weaving, tool repair, quiet indoor labor synchronized with long nights. Summer welcomed travel, trade, and late evening gatherings beneath lingering twilight. Time, therefore, was cyclical, embodied, environmental. There were no rigid weekly productivity expectations. Rest followed exertion naturally. Illness demanded pause without negotiation. Childbirth, harvest, storms, all reshaped daily flow without conflict against mechanical schedules. Even childhood unfolded without minute-by-minute structuring. Children slept when tired, woke when rested, played until dusk signaled return. Elderly individuals often woke earlier, napped more frequently. Their rhythms respected rather than corrected. Communities shared temporal understanding through environmental cues. Church bells existed in some regions, but their purpose leaned spiritual or communal rather than industrial. They marked prayer gatherings, warnings, not shift changes. The psychological experience of time under this organic system felt profoundly different. Without constant measurement, moments expanded. Waiting did not produce anxiety because precision was not expected. Travel took, as long as it took. Letters arrived unpredictably. Crops grew at biological speed. Patience was not virtue, it was necessity. Silence filled gaps where modern life inserts urgency. There was space to sit beside fires without agenda, to watch weather move across hills, to listen to animals settling at night. These unmeasured intervals allowed the nervous system to downshift regularly, preventing the chronic tension now associated with clock-driven productivity. Darkness itself functioned as a neurological signal. Firelight's low luminance did not suppress melatonin the way electric light does. As flames dimmed, the brain received clear biochemical instruction: rest was approaching. Hormones aligned accordingly, easing transition into sleep rather than resisting it. Even soundscapes differed. Instead of traffic, machinery, or digital alerts, nights carried wind, insects, distant owls, the occasional creak of timber. These irregular, natural sounds did not demand attention. They blended into subconscious awareness, a cradle rather than a disruption. Over generations, humans became exquisitely tuned to these patterns. Fishermen woke with tides. Shepherds rose with flock movement. Bakers worked pre-dawn not by alarm, but by necessity shaped through habit and darkness. Time knowledge was local, embodied, inherited. Elders taught younger generations how to read sky color, bird migration, frost thickness, shadow length. These skills functioned as living clocks, ecological lit, heresy replacing mechanical precision. Importantly, this organic temporality did not mean life was easier. Labor was physically demanding, survival uncertain, but the structure of time imposed less psychological fragmentation. Rest was not stolen from productivity. It was interwoven with it. Fatigue was acknowledged, not overridden. Darkness was honored, not conquered. Night waking was normalized, not medicalized. Only much later, when mechanical clocks spread from monasteries to town centers, from towers to homes, would this fluid temporal landscape begin to stiffen. But in that earlier world, the world before ticking hands and numbered faces, humans lived inside time the way one lives inside weather. They felt it change on the skin. They sensed it in bone, deep tiredness. They trusted it the way plants trust sunlight, without needing to measure its passing. Sleep came in waves, not schedules. Work rose and fell like breath, and midnight, far from being an inconvenience, was simply another quiet shoreline in the long, unbroken ocean of the night, long before the precise ticking of mechanical clocks, before gears learned to divide hours into obedient fractions. Humanity began its first quiet experiments with measuring the invisible. Time itself could not be touched. It could not be stored, traded, or seen directly. Yet people felt its passage constantly, in aging skin, in changing seasons, in the slow movement of stars. And so, across different civilizations, early thinkers, priests, astronomers, and artisans began searching for ways to make time visible, to give form to something that was otherwise only sensed. Their earliest solutions did not rely on springs or wheels, but on nature itself, on shadow, on water, on flame, on the physics of decay and motion. The sundial was among the most elegant of these inventions. It required no machinery, no fuel, only sunlight and a fixed object placed with intention. A simple vertical rod, known as a gnomon, cast a shadow that moved as the sun crossed the sky. That shadow, creeping slowly across marked stone or earth, became a living hand pointing to the hour. There was something almost poetic about it. The sun, source of life, also became the keeper of time. As light shifted, so too did human awareness of the day's progression. Ancient Egyptians erected monumental obelisks whose shadows stretched across temple grounds. Greek and Roman plazas incorporated carved sundials into civic architecture. In marketplaces, scholars could estimate midday by the shortening of shadows beneath their feet. Yet sundials were not perfectly reliable. Cloud cover obscured their readings. Seasonal solar angles altered shadow length. Winter light produced different arcs than summer light. Latitude mattered. Precision, therefore, was approximate. But for societies still living in organic rhythm, approximation was enough. The sundial linked astronomy, geometry, and daily ritual in one continuous experience. Priests timed prayers. Farmers gauged work intervals. Philosophers contemplated the movement of celestial order made visible on stone. Time, through the sundial, remained inseparable from the sky. But humans sought ways to measure time even when the sun withdrew. At night, indoors, or beneath storm clouds. And so they turned to water. Water clocks, or clepsydras, emerged in multiple regions independently, from ancient Mesopotamia to China, from Egypt to Greece. Their principle was deceptively simple. Water flows at a measurable rate. If contained and released carefully, its movement could represent the passage of time. Some designs allowed water to drip from one vessel into another. Markings along the receiving container indicated elapsed intervals. Others used floating bowls with small holes that slowly filled and sank, each submersion marking a completed duration. Unlike sundials, water clocks functioned in darkness. They worked inside temples, courts, and homes. Greek law courts famously used clepsydras to limit speaking time during trials. When the vessel emptied, the speaker's argument ended, physics enforcing rhetoric. In Egypt, temple priests used elaborate water clocks to regulate nighttime rituals. The slow dripping echoed in sacred chambers, each drop reinforcing the rhythm of devotion. There was a meditative quality to these devices. Watching water accumulate, hearing droplets strike, sensing time as fluid rather than mechanical. Flow replaced shadow. Continuity replaced segmentation. Yet water clocks also introduced new awareness of physical variables. Temperature altered flow speed. Mineral buildup clogged apertures. Evaporation changed volume. Early engineers began grappling, perhaps unconsciously, with fluid dynamics, experimenting with vessel shapes, pressure differentials, and calibrated holes to stabilize flow. Physics was no longer abstract. It became practical, ritualistic, embodied in daily function. Still, water required maintenance. It froze in winter, spilled if disturbed, required refilling, and so, in colder regions or portable contexts, another method emerged, one governed not by flow, but by consumption. The candle clock. A candle, when properly made, burns at a relatively predictable rate. By marking measured intervals along its length, people could estimate time through the gradual disappearance of wax. Monasteries used candle clocks to regulate prayer cycles through the night. In East Asia, incense clocks performed similar roles, scented sticks burning down to indicate meditation periods. There was something deeply symbolic in this form of timekeeping. Light itself was being consumed to reveal time. Illumination became sacrifice. As wax melted, moments vanished irreversibly. Unlike water, which could be replenished, or shadows, which returned each day, candle time was terminal, a visible metaphor for mortality. Some candle clocks incorporated nails embedded at intervals. As wax melted, the nails fell onto metal trays below, producing soft chimes that marked passing hours. Sound entered the physics of timekeeping, an early fusion of measurement and atmosphere. These devices illuminated the night literally and temporally, but they too had limitations. Drafts altered burn rates, wax composition varied, uneven wicks distorted accuracy. Precision remained approximate, but again, precision was not yet the goal. The goal was awareness. Across these early inventions, sundials, water clocks, candle clocks, a pattern emerges. Humans were not merely measuring time, they were translating it into sensory experiences. Shadow could be seen, water could be heard, flame could be watched. Time became something the body could perceive through sight, sound, and even scent. These devices also intertwined deeply with ritual life. In temples, water clocks regulated offerings. In monasteries, candles structured prayer vigils. In civic spaces, sundials anchored communal gathering schedules. Timekeeping did not exist separately from spirituality or governance. It was embedded within them. The physics underlying these systems remained gentle, continuous, and organic. Shadow glided. Water dripped. Flame flickered. There were no abrupt ticks, no sudden alarms. Measurement flowed in harmony with natural processes rather than imposing mechanical interruption. This had psychological consequences. Because time passed visibly but slowly, urgency remained subdued. Watching a shadow move did not provoke anxiety. Observing water fill a bowl did not demand haste. Even as humans began quantifying duration, they did so through mediums that preserved calmness. Time was still experienced as atmosphere rather than pressure. Different cultures refined these technologies uniquely. Chinese engineers developed complex multi, tiered water clocks with gears powered by controlled flow, proto-mechanical systems foreshadowing later clockwork. Islamic scholars during the medieval period constructed ornate astronomical clocks combining water weights and automata to mark prayer times with remarkable sophistication. In Europe, cathedral builders embedded sundials into church walls, aligning architecture with solar physics. Monastic communities depended heavily on candle and water clocks to regulate canonical hours. The structured cycles of worship that punctuate both day and night. In each case, timekeeping served communal harmony more than productivity enforcement. It synchronized people spiritually, agriculturally, socially, not industrially. Yet beneath the surface of these ritual tools, something deeper was unfolding. Humans were learning to trust measurable processes. They were discovering that nature's physical laws, gravity pulling water downward, combustion consuming wax, planetary motion casting shadows, could be harnessed to structure human life. Physics was entering culture quietly. Every dripping vessel, every marked candle, every carved sundial face represented an early collaboration between observation and engineering. People began thinking in intervals rather than vague spans. Meetings could be set. When the shadow reaches this line, prayers could last until the candle burns halfway. Legal arguments could be bounded by vessel emptiness. Time, though still fluid, was beginning to crystallize. These experiments also cultivated craftsmanship. Artisans refined wax mixtures for steadier burns. Metalworkers shaped calibrated vessels. Stone carvers inscribed increasingly precise solar markings. Measurement demanded dead skill, and with skill came innovation. Gradually, thinkers sought greater consistency, methods less vulnerable to weather, temperature, or material irregularities. The desire for reliability, especially in growing urban centers, pushed experimentation forward. But even as technologies evolved, the sensory intimacy of early timekeeping left lasting cultural impressions. The sight of sunset shadows still signaled day's end. The glow of candles still evoked rest. The sound of dripping water still soothed the mind. These were not just tools. They were environmental companions shaping human perception of duration. In contrast to modern clocks, which abstract time into digital digits or silent quartz oscillations, ancient devices kept time through processes humans could witness unfolding. Time was not hidden behind glass faces. It lived in the room. It cast itself across walls. It echoed in chambers. It melted before one's eyes. And so, in these early experiments, we find the first bridge between cosmic motion and daily routine, between the physics of the universe and the rituals of human life. The sun's journey became shadow. Gravity became flow. Fire became tie-in. Through decay, through movement, through light and loss, humanity began its slow apprenticeship to time. Long before the pendulum would swing, long before gears would bite into one another, long before the ticking sound would come to define the modern mind's relationship with the hours. In this earlier age, time was still patient, still visible, still breathing through the elements from which all life, and all measurement, first emerged. Long before clocks learned to tick with precision, before minutes were divided into obedient fragments, the measurement of time still struggled with inconsistency. Water flowed unevenly. Candles burned imperfectly. Shadows shifted with the seasons. Humanity could sense time's passage, but could not yet regulate it with dependable rhythm. What was missing was a steady pulse, a motion so consistent that it could divide duration into equal, repeating units. That pulse revealed itself not in a workshop, but in a cathedral. In the late 16th century, a young Italian scholar named Galileo Galilei is said to have stood inside the Cathedral of Pisa, watching a large bronze lamp suspended from the ceiling. The lamp had been recently lit and, after being moved, it began to swing gently back and forth in the vast interior air. To most observers, the motion would have faded into the background, just another drifting movement in a cavernous sacred space. But Galileo watched more carefully. As the lamp swung, he noticed something curious. Whether the arc was wide or narrow, whether the swing was slowing or still energetic, the time it took to move from one side to the other seemed remarkably consistent. He tested this intuition the only way he could in that moment, by using his own pulse. Placing fingers to his wrist, he counted heartbeats as the lamp completed each swing. Again and again, the interval appeared unchanged. This observation would later be known as isochronism, the principle that a pendulum swing period remains constant regardless of amplitude, at least within small angles. In simpler terms, a pendulum keeps equal time. This was revolutionary. For the first time, motion itself, pure, repeating motion, could serve as a stable regulator of duration, not decay, not flow, not combustion, but oscillation. The physics behind the pendulum's behavior lay in gravity and inertia working in partnership. When displaced from its resting position, the pendulum bob is pulled downward by gravity. As it falls, it gains speed. Passing through the lowest point, inertia carries it upward on the opposite side until gravity again slows and reverses it. This exchange continues. Gravitational pull converting potential energy into kinetic energy and back again, producing rhythmic oscillation. What fascinated early thinkers was the regularity of this exchange. The pendulum did not simply move, it returned. It repeated. It created intervals that could be trusted. Unlike dripping water, which depended on pressure and temperature, unlike candles, which depended on material purity, the pendulum relied on universal forces. Gravity behaved consistently. Length determined timing. A longer pendulum swung more slowly. A shorter one swung faster. This relationship, later formalized mathematically, allowed engineers to calibrate swings to desired intervals. For the first time, timekeeping could be tuned. The pendulum thus became something more than a physical curiosity. It became a bridge between cosmic law and human measurement. Christian Huygens, a Dutch scientist in the 17th century, would later refine Galileo's insights and construct the first true pendulum clock. By coupling the pendulum to an escapement mechanism, a system that released energy in controlled increments, the pendulum's natural oscillation could regulate gear movement. But before the engineering matured, before clock faces displayed its authority, the pendulum existed as a philosophical and sensory revelation. Observers described its motion as hypnotic, back and forth, back and forth. Its rhythm resembled breathing, or the rocking of a cradle or waves meeting the shore. Unlike the abrupt ticks of later escapements, early pendulum swings were silent, continuous, almost meditative. It was here that the metaphor of the pendulum as the heartbeat of mechanical time began to emerge. A heart regulates life through rhythmic contraction. A pendulum regulates time through rhythmic oscillation. Both transform energy into repeating pulses that sustain larger systems. Inside a clock, the pendulum became the organ that kept the machine alive. Without it, gears would spin chaotically. Springs would unwind uncontrollably. The pendulum imposed order, dividing motion into measured increments, the way a heart divides life into beats. This analogy resonated deeply in early modern thought, where the universe itself was often imagined as a grand clockwork governed by divine design. The pendulum symbolized harmony between physics and existence. Its motion also influenced human psychology in subtle ways. Rooms containing pendulum clocks developed ambient rhythm. The slow sweep of the bob created visual pacing. Even without sound, the eye detected movement at the edge of awareness, a reminder of passing duration. Later, when escapements added the familiar tick-tock, that sound became inseparable from domestic life. But beneath the ticking was always the pendulum, the regulating body behind the audible voice. Engineers quickly discovered challenges. Air resistance slowed swings. Friction at pivot points introduced error. Temperature changes altered rod length. subtly affecting timing. Metal expanded in warmth, contracted in cold, causing pendulums to lose or gain seconds. This drove further innovation. Compensated pendulums were developed using mixed metals that expanded differently, stabilizing length across temperatures. Enclosed clock cases reduced air interference. Precision machining improved pivot smoothness. Thus, the pendulum did more than regulate clocks. It accelerated advancements in materials science, thermodynamics awareness, and mechanical engineering. Its demand for consistency pushed craftsmanship toward scientific rigor. But beyond workshops, the pendulum began reshaping society's relationship with time itself. Where earlier timekeeping flowed, shadow gliding, water dripping, pendulum time oscillated. It introduced segmentation, repetition, predictable units. Seconds became reliable, minutes became enforceable. Schedules began hardening. The pendulum's steady beat trained human environments to expect regularity. Church bells rang more precisely. Astronomical observations improved. Navigation calculations refined. Time was no longer approximate atmosphere. It was measurable structure. Yet the pendulum never lost its sensory poetry. Even today, watching one swing evokes calmness. Its predictability reassures the mind. Psychologists note that repetitive, slow oscillations can entrain relaxation responses, lowering heart rate, stabilizing breathing. It is no coincidence that rocking chairs soothe infants, that metronomes guide musicians, that pendulum meditation devices exist. The physics of oscillation resonates with biological rhythm. In this way, the pendulum did not merely impose mechanical order on humanity. It mirrored organic tempo. It externalized the body's internal pacing. Its swing echoed walking gait. Its repetition resembled breath cycles. Its constancy paralleled circadian regularity. Perhaps this is why pendulum clocks felt less intrusive than later digital precision. Their motion remained analog, visible, embodied. They did not hide time inside silent circuitry. They performed it, physically, gracefully, endlessly. In observatories, long pendulums tracked stellar motion with unprecedented accuracy. In homes, smaller versions regulated domestic routine. In town halls, monumental regulators synchronized civic life. Wherever pendulums hung, they established temporal authority. People adjusted behavior to their beat. Meetings began on the hour. Trains departed to the minute. Industrialization would later weaponize this precision. But its root lay in the gentle physics of swinging mass governed by gravity. The pendulum thus marked a turning point in human temporality. Before it, time was sensed. After it, time was counted. Before it, night waking felt natural. After it, uninterrupted sleep became idealized, aligned with fixed work schedules enforced by regulated clocks. The pendulum did not cause this shift alone, but it enabled the precision required for mechanized societies to emerge. And yet, if one stands quietly before an old pendulum clock today, listening past the ticking, watching the slow arc of brass or wood, one can still feel its older meaning. Not urgency, not pressure, but rhythm, a reminder that time, even when engineered, still moves like breath. Forward, back, forward again. Each swing a small return. Each return a reassurance that motion can be measured, yet remain graceful. In that oscillation lives the union of physics and philosophy. Gravity shaping duration, inertia sustaining continuity, and humanity learning, for the first time, to entrust its hours to the steady heartbeat, like pulse of a pendulum moving patiently through the air. Long before the face of a clock could calmly display the hour, before hands could glide with quiet authority across numbered circles, there had to exist an internal language. A hidden conversation of motion taking place beneath brass plates and wooden casings. This language was spoken not in sound, but in contact. Toothed wheels touching one another, transferring force, dividing movement, shaping the invisible into measurable form. These were the gear trains, the silent engineers of precision. At first glance, gears seem simple. Circular discs lined with evenly spaced teeth, interlocking so that when one turns, the next must follow. But inside this simplicity lived one of the most profound breakthroughs in the engineering of time. Bika. Use time, unlike motion, does not move on its own. Motion must be generated by falling weights, coiled springs, or flowing water. But raw motion is chaotic. A weight falls quickly. A spring unwinds rapidly. Energy releases all at once unless restrained. Gears provided the means to control that release. When a driving gear, powered by stored energy, turned, its teeth pushed against the teeth of a neighboring gear. Each contact transferred force in increments. Movement could be slowed, redirected, multiplied, or divided depending on gear size and tooth count. This is where mathematics entered the clockmaker's art. If a large gear with many teeth drove a smaller gear, the smaller gear turned faster. If a small gear drove a larger one, the larger gear turned more slowly. Ratios emerged, predictable relationships between rotations. Clockmakers realized that by arranging gears carefully, they could transform rapid mechanical motion into the slow, deliberate pacing required to measure hours. A falling weight might unwind a drum in minutes, but through a cascade of gear reductions, that same energy could be stretched across an entire day. Thus, gear trains became translators, converting physical force into temporal structure. Inside early clocks, these trains extended in layered assemblies. The great wheel connected to the power source. It drove the center wheel. The center wheel engaged the third wheel. The third wheel turned the escapement wheel. Each stage reduced speed while preserving continuity. This chain of contact resembled a mechanical river. Energy flowing through toothed channels, slowed and shaped as it passed from one wheel to the next. The ratios themselves required careful calculation. To display hours, minutes, and sometimes seconds, gears had to rotate at precise fractional speeds relative to one another. A minute hand needed to complete one full rotation every 60 minutes. The hour hand needed 12 times longer. This demanded gear pairings whose tooth counts reflected these divisions. For example, a gear with 60 teeth meshing with one of 12 teeth would create a 5:1 rotational ratio. Multiply such pairings across a train, and entire time hierarchies could be engineered. Hours emerged from mathematics embodied in metal. Minutes became geometry made visible. It was here that clockmaking began merging craftsmanship with the theoretical science. Clockmakers were not merely artisans. They were applied mathematicians translating numerical relationships into physical architecture. Every tooth had to be shaped precisely. If uneven, motion would jerk. If misaligned, friction would increase. If poorly spaced, timekeeping would drift. Tooth profiles evolved from simple triangular shapes to more sophisticated curves, cycloidal and later involute forms, designed to maintain smooth force transfer during rotation. This refinement minimized energy loss and wear. Invisible physics governed these improvements. Friction, torque, inertia, forces that could not be seen directly, but whose effects were felt in accuracy. Lubricants were developed to reduce resistance. Polished pivots allowed freer rotation. Harder metals resisted deformation. Within the clock's casing, an entire microcosm of physical law unfolded continuously. And yet, from the outside, all this complexity resolved into something serene, the slow movement of hands across a dial. Visible time powered by invisible mechanics. The poetic contrast fascinated observers. Behind the calm face of a clock lived constant motion. Wheels turning, teeth and gauging, forces exchanging. A hidden choreography sustaining the illusion of stillness. Time appeared effortless, but only because labor had been internalized within machinery. This concealment altered human perception. Before mechanical clocks, timekeeping processes were visible: dripping water, melting wax, shifting shadow. One could watch duration unfold. With gear-driven clocks, time became abstracted. The processes remained, but hidden behind casings. People saw results rather than mechanisms. Time felt more authoritative, less negotiable. The gear train's precision also enabled synchronization beyond natural limits. Multiple clocks could be calibrated to the same ratios. Towns could align bells. Observatories could coordinate celestial tracking. Navigation calculations depended on accurate longitudinal time measurement, something only precise gear systems could sustain. Thus, gear trains extended their influence from workshops to oceans. They allowed sailors to compare local solar time with shipboard clock time, estimating position across vast seas. In this way, toothed wheels contributed quietly to global exploration. Yet inside domestic spaces, their presence remained gentle. Mantel clocks ticked softly in parlors. Long-case clocks, later called grandfather clocks, housed extended gear trains within tall wooden cases. Their slow pendulum swings regulated gear release, while weights descended gradually, powering the train for days. Opening such a clock revealed layers of wheels stacked like celestial orbits, each turning at its ordained pace. Some completed rotations every hour, others every 12 hours, still others every day or week. Time was no longer singular, it was stratified. Multiple durations coexisted inside one machine, each expressed through rotational mathematics. The gear train also made complications possible. Additional functions layered atop basic timekeeping. Calendars could be added through extended ratios accounting for days and months. Astronomical clocks displayed lunar phases, zodiac positions, even planetary motion approximations, all driven by interlocking gear systems translating cosmic cycles into mechanical motion. This represented one of humanity's earliest attempts to miniaturize the universe. Inside ornate clock cases, the heavens turned in brass. Physics, astronomy, and engineering converged through tooth precision. Yet achieving such sophistication required immense patience. Gear cutting was labor-intensive. Teeth were filed by hand in early periods, each requiring uniform spacing. Errors accumulated quickly. A miscut gear could compromise entire trains. Clockmakers developed specialized tools, dividing engines, gear, cutting frames, to improve consistency. Apprentices trained for years mastering tolerances invisible to casual observers. This devotion reflected the stakes. A clock was not merely decorative. It regulated monasteries, courts, cities. Accuracy carried social weight, and so as gear trains improved, societies adjusted to their reliability. Meetings adhered to fixed hours, market openings synchronized, legal proceedings followed scheduled durations. Temporal precision began shaping behavior, yet for all its rigidity, the gear train retained a certain elegance. Watching exposed mechanisms, as in skeleton clocks, reveals continuous, flowing motion rather than abrupt segmentation. Wheels glide. Teeth engage smoothly. Motion cascades from one axis to another, like falling dominoes slowed into grace. The aesthetic beauty of gear trains captivated Enlightenment thinkers, who saw in them metaphors for universal order, each part contributing to harmonious totality. Philosophers compared societies to clockworks. Scientists imagined nature itself as a grand system of interacting gears governed by physical law. Thus, the humble tooth wheel transcended its material function. It became symbolic of rational structure, of measurable cause and effect. And yet, beneath this rationality, there remained something almost alive in their movement. Gear trains hummed faintly when active. Lubricated teeth whispered against one another. The steady rotation felt less like machinery and more like circulation, a mechanical bloodstream distributing energy through a metallic body. Time flowed through these channels the way blood flows through veins. Invisible, essential, continuous. If the pendulum was the clock's heartbeat, the gear train was its nervous system, transmitting regulated motion outward to visible indicators. Together, they formed the core architecture of mechanical temporality. Even today, modern watches, though miniaturized beyond imagination, rely on the same fundamental principle. Micro gears, some smaller than G. Grains of rice, still divide motion into calibrated intervals. Quartz oscillations may regulate timing now, but gears continue translating oscillation into display. The legacy endures. Inside every analog clock, ancient physics persists. Torque transferred tooth by tooth, ratio by ratio, shaping hours from stored force. And though digital time has hidden these processes further, replacing visible trains with electronic pulses, the conceptual foundation remains, rooted in those early toothed experiments. Humanity learned to engineer duration not by stopping time, but by disciplining motion, by allowing energy to flow, but only in measured steps, by trusting that precision could emerge from repeated contact, tooth meeting tooth in endless sequence. Thus, within the quiet casing of a clock, invisible physics continues its patient labor, turning force into rhythm, rhythm into measurement, and measurement into the calm, familiar movement of hands that glide across the face of time, serene on the surface, yet powered always by the intricate, hidden choreography of gears moving faithfully in the dark. Before the escapement existed, clocks could generate motion, but they could not restrain it. Weights could fall, springs could unwind, gear trains could transfer force through intricate ratios, but all of this energy, once released, behaved like water rushing downhill, eager, continuous, unstoppable. Left unchecked, a clock's gears would spin freely until the driving force exhausted itself in moments rather than hours. Time, in those early machines, flowed too quickly, too chaotically to measure. What was needed was not more power but control, a way to divide motion into equal, repeatable fragments, a gatekeeper, a regulator. Something that could take the wild continuity of physical force and discipline it into steady pulses. That invention was the escapement. It was one of the most transformative mechanisms in the history of engineering. Not because it generated energy, but because it restrained it. The escapement sits at the threshold between stored force and measured time. On one side lies the power source, a descending weight or tightening spring. On the other side lies the gear train and clock hands. Between them stands the escapement, releasing motion in carefully rationed increments. Its function is beautifully paradoxical. It both stops motion and allows it. Imagine a rotating wheel, the escape wheel, driven by the clock's power source. Its teeth press forward constantly, seeking to turn. But instead of spinning freely, they encounter a locking mechanism, typically pallets attached to a verge anchor or lever. Each pallet catches a tooth, halting the wheel's motion. For a brief instant, energy accumulates behind the blockage. Then, as the regulating element, such as a pendulum or balance wheel, swings, it nudges the pallets just enough to release one tooth. The wheel advances slightly. Immediately, the next tooth is caught. Motion stops again. This cycle repeats endlessly: lock, release, lock, release. Continuous force is thus converted into discrete steps. It is here, in this conversion, that time becomes audible. Each release produces a sound, the now familiar tick, followed by the returning lock, the talk. The tick-tock is not merely noise. It is the sound of energy being rationed, physics metered into equality. Without the escapement, a clock would be silent but useless. With it, time gains voice. Early escapements were crude by modern standards. The verge escapement, one of the earliest designs, used a crown-shaped escape wheel interacting with a vertical rod and pallets. It functioned, but inefficiently, introducing friction, wear, and irregular timing. Yet even this imperfect mechanism achieved something extraordinary. It allowed clocks to run for extended durations while maintaining relative consistency. Monasteries were among the first to benefit. Mechanical clocks regulated prayer hours more reliably than water or candle systems. The escapements ticking echoed through stone corridors, structuring devotion with mechanical precision. Later refinements improved both efficiency and accuracy. The anchor escapement, developed in the 17th century, allowed pendulums to swing in smaller arcs, reducing energy loss. This innovation dramatically improved timekeeping precision, bringing daily error margins down from hours to minutes, and eventually seconds. Each advancement refined how energy was released. Smaller impulses, more consistent timing, less mechanical interference. The escapement thus functioned as both valve and translator. It regulated power while communicating rhythm outward through sound and motion. To watch an escapement in action, especially in exposed clockworks, is to witness controlled chaos. The escape wheel strains forward continuously, teeth pressing against restraint. Pallets alternately catch and release. The pendulum or balance wheel oscillates, governing the cadence of release. It is a dance of tension and permission. Energy always seeks movement. The escapement grants it, but only in measured doses. This principle extends beyond clockmaking into broader engineering philosophy. Power must be controlled to be useful. Steam engines require valves. Electrical systems require resistors. Hydraulics require regulators. The escapement represents one of the earliest embodiments of this idea, that unregulated force is wasteful, but disciplined force is productive. There is also something psychologically resonant about the ticking it produces. The sound is steady, predictable, reassuring. Each tick confirms continuity. Each talk confirms balance. In quiet rooms, the escapement's voice becomes ambient, a sonic backdrop marking existence itself. For some, it is comforting, a reminder that order persists. For others, it introduces awareness of passing time, heightening mortality's reminder. But less of emotional interpretation, the tick-tock represents physics made audible. Gravity pulls weights downward in silence. Springs unwind silently. But the escapement translates these invisible processes into sensory experience. You can hear energy being released. You can hear time being divided. The soundscape of human civilization changed because of this mechanism. Before mechanical clocks, night sounds consisted of wind, animals, fire, crackle, distant voices. After escapements entered homes, ticking joined the nocturnal environment, subtle but persistent. In bedrooms, beside beds, on mantelpieces, inside hallways, time began speaking continuously. Some historians argue this constant auditory reminder contributed to shifting sleep psychology. Midnight waking, once natural, became framed against measured hours. People could count sleeplessness in ticks. Yet in other contexts, the rhythm soothed. The regularity resembled heartbeats, footsteps, breathing. Biological cadences mirrored mechanically. Craftsmen devoted immense care to escapement design because its performance determined clock accuracy. If pallets released teeth unevenly, timing drifted. If friction eased, oscillations weakened. Lubrication, material hardness, tooth geometry, all influenced escapement efficiency. Jewels, small synthetic rubies or sapphires, were later introduced in watch escapements to reduce wear at contact points. These gemstone bearings extended longevity and preserved precision. Thus, luxury timepieces owe part of their refinement to the optimization of escapement friction. Different escapement designs emerged across centuries: verge, anchor, deadbeat, detent, lever, each improving energy transfer and minimizing disturbance to the regulating oscillator. The goal was always the same: release just enough energy to sustain oscillation without disrupting its natural period. In pendulum clocks, this meant delivering tiny impulses to maintain swing amplitude. In balance, wheel watches, it meant sustaining oscillation despite positional changes. The escapement, therefore, did not merely divide time. It sustained it. Without its periodic impulses, pendulums would slow and stop. Balance wheels would lose amplitude. The escapement fed them energy in rhythm, much like a pacemaker sustaining cardiac motion. This reciprocal relationship reinforced the heartbeat metaphor of mechanical time. Power source provides energy. Escapement meters it. Oscillator regulates release. Gear train distributes motion. Hands display result. A complete circulatory system of time. Observing an escapement also reveals the tension between continuity and interruption. Nature tends toward flow, rivers, wind, planetary orbits. The escapement interrupts flow deliberately, slicing continuity into discrete instants. Seconds are not natural units. They are engineered pauses in motion. Each tick represents an artificial segmentation imposed upon physical reality. And yet, through repetition, these segments feel natural to human perception. We think in seconds because escapements taught us to hear them. Even language absorbed their cadence. Phrases like, "the clock is ticking," or "time ticks away," embed mechanical metaphor into cognition. Modern quartz and atomic clocks have abandoned traditional escapements, using electronic oscillations and digital counting instead. Yet designers often simulate tick-tock sounds artificially, recognizing the psychological comfort embedded in that rhythm. We miss the audible physics. We miss hearing time unfold. In antique clocks, the escapement remains visible, often framed within brass arches or skeletonized plates. Watching it operate evokes quiet wonder, such small movements governing vast temporal experience. Tiny pallets stopping mighty force. Delicate oscillations disciplining gravity. It is humbling to realize that the structuring of human schedules, industries, and sleep patterns rests partly on this modest mechanism. A device whose genius lies not in motion, but in restraint, because to control time, one must first control energy, and to control energy, one must learn where to stop it and when to let it pass. Thus, within every tick and every tock lives the sound of chaos being negotiated. Not silenced, not eliminated, but shaped into rhythm. The escapement does not fight physics. It collaborates with it, allowing motion to proceed, but only one measured step at a time, transforming invisible force into audible order, and turning the restless continuity of the physical world into the steady, comforting pulse by which humanity learned to live. Night settled differently over the workshops of early clockmakers. While most of the town withdrew into darkness, shutters drawn, hearths dimmed, conversations fading into sleep, a few narrow windows still glowed with wavering candlelight. Inside those rooms, time itself was being shaped not loudly, not hurriedly, but with a patience that mirrored the very machines being built. Clockmaking was never a craft of daylight alone. Precision required stillness. Concentration thrived in quiet hours. And so many artisans found themselves working long after sunset, when the world outside softened and distractions dissolved into silence. Candle flames flickered low over wooden benches scarred by years of careful labor. Tools lay arranged in deliberate order, files of varying coarseness, hand drills, tweezers, calipers, burnishers, oilers no thicker than quills. Each instrument had its place, and each movement within that space was controlled, economical, almost meditative. The air carried a layered scent, warm beeswax, metal filings, oiled wood, faint smoke from trimmed wicks. It was a smell both industrial and intimate, signaling work that was technical yet deeply personal. Unlike blacksmiths or carpenters, clockmakers did not battle their materials with force. Their work demanded gentleness. Brass plat could warp under careless pressure. Gear teeth could fracture if cut too aggressively. Balance springs, thin as hair, required breath, held precision to handle without distortion. At night, this delicacy felt amplified. Candlelight did not flood the room, it sculpted it. Illumination gathered in small circles, leaving corners in shadow. The workbench became an island of brightness floating in dimness, focusing the craftsman's attention inward. Here, filing a gear was not merely mechanical. It was rhythmic. Each stroke of the file shaved microscopic curls of metal. The sound was soft, granular, like distant sand shifting. Artisans developed internal cadences. Stroke a lift, inspect, rotate, stroke again. Hours passed unnoticed because the work itself created its own tempo. Gear cutting, especially in earlier centuries before mechanized dividing engines, relied heavily on hand methods. Teeth spacing had to remain uniform around the gear's circumference. Even slight irregularities could introduce timing errors. Clockmakers used indexing tools, rudimentary but effective, to mark tooth positions. Then, tooth by tooth, they filed valleys and shaped profiles, ensuring each engagement would mesh smoothly with its partner gear. It was painstaking labor. But it was also strangely calming. Metal responded predictably. It did not argue, hurry, or resist emotionally. It yielded to patience, rewarded steadiness, punished haste. In this way, clockmaking cultivated temperament as much as skill. Many apprentices recalled nighttime workshops as formative spaces, places where masters spoke little, but demonstrated everything through motion. Young trainees watched how fingers held tools, how eyes inspected tolerances invisible to casual sight, how breath slowed during delicate adjustments. Learning occurred through observation in near silence. Occasionally, the quiet would be interrupted by sound, not conversation, but mechanism. Prototype ticking. On nearby shelves or suspended test frames, partially assembled clocks ran under observation. Their escapements clicked tentatively, sometimes irregularly, as artisans evaluated performance. Tick, pause, a tick, tick, stop. Each inconsistency signaled a flaw, friction too high, pallet misaligned, pendulum length miscalculated. The craftsman would pause his filing, listen, and diagnose through sound alone. In his way, workshops at night became acoustic laboratories. Clockmakers trained their ears to detect imperfection. A steady tick indicated balance. A stutter suggested interference. A fading cadence meant energy lost somewhere in the train. Sound guided correction. The ticking of multiple prototypes layered into a subdued mechanical chorus. Irregular yet strangely soothing. Not the synchronized ticking of finished clocks, but the tentative speech of machines still learning to keep time. Between these sounds lay long stretches of stillness. Outside, streets were empty. Hoofbeats rare. Wind pressed gently against shutters. Occasionally, distant church bells marked late hours, their resonance traveling across sleeping rooftops. Inside, however, time was not resting. It was being engineered. Candlelight played across polished brass surfaces, gears stacked like miniature suns, reflecting gold against the darker grain of wooden benches. Shadows of turning wheels flickered along walls when test mechanisms ran, creating the illusion of larger machines breathing within the room. There was intimacy in this work. Clockmakers often labored alone or with a single apprentice. Unlike factory production that would emerge centuries later, each clock was personal, assembled by identifiable hands, adjusted to individual standards, signed sometimes with hidden maker's marks engraved beneath plates. Working at night deepened this personal connection. Fatigue softened rigid thinking, allowing intuition to guide fine adjustments. The boundary between craftsman and mechanism blurred. Both moved slowly, deliberately, quietly. Oil lamps and candles demanded maintenance as well. Wicks required trimming to prevent smoke. Wax had to be replaced. Light intensity fluctuated, forcing artisans to reposition work or lean closer for clarity. This variable illumination heightened tactile reliance. Fingers felt edges more than eyes saw them. Surfaces were judged through touch, smoothness, burr presence, alignment. Clockmakers developed extraordinary sensitivity in their fingertips, able to detect misalignments smaller than a grain of sand. Time, being built in darkness, required sensory adaptation. There was also philosophical reflection woven into these nocturnal hours. Many clockmakers viewed their craft as participation in cosmic order. They were replicating celestial regularity, translating planetary motion into mechanical rhythm. Night, with its visible stars, reinforced this symbolism. Looking up from the bench, one might glimpse constellations through the window, vast cosmic clocks turning silently overhead, while miniature versions took shape below. This parallel inspired humility. The workshop became a microcosm of the universe. Gears orbiting, pendulums oscillating, escapements pulsing like distant quasars of energy release. Even failures carried quiet lessons. A gear miscut after hours of filing required starting anew. A spring snapped meant days lost, yet anger rarely filled these spaces. Frustration existed, but it was muted by the craft's inherent demand for patience. One could not rush precision any more than one could rush time itself. Thus, temperament aligned with profession. Calm minds built accurate clocks. As midnight deepened, bodily rhythms shifted. Hands slowed slightly. Eyes strained more easily, but paradoxically, concentration often sharpened. The mind entering a contemplative state fostered by solitude and repetition. Some artisans described losing awareness of clock time entirely while building devices meant to measure it. They entered flow states where hours dissolved into sequences of tiny adjustments. It was a poetic contradiction, becoming timeless while constructing timekeepers. When fatigue finally required rest, candles were extinguished one by one. Darkness reclaimed the workshop, yet prototypes often continued running, ticking softly through the night, unsupervised but alive. In that darkness, half-finished machines rehearsed their rhythms. Weights descended slowly. Pendulums swung in narrow arcs. Escapements rationed energy into patient pulses. Morning would return, bringing daylight inspection and further refinement. But those nighttime hours, candlelit, silent, meticulous, were where much of the soul of clockmaking resided. Not in grand tower installations or public clock unveilings, but in these intimate rooms where individuals labored quietly, shaping brass and steel into instruments capable of disciplining duration itself. And if one could stand invisibly within such a workshop, listening without being seen, the experience would feel less like industry and more like meditation. Soft filing strokes, occasional ticking, breath measured unconsciously to hand movement, candle flames wavering like pendulums made of fire. Time not yet displayed, but slowly, patiently being born in the dark. Long before personal clocks rested on mantelpieces, before pocket watches slipped into waistcoats, before factory whistles cut through morning fog, the sound that most powerfully organized human time did not come from within homes at all. It came from towers, high above villages and towns. Suspended in wooden frames or stone chambers hung massive bells, cast from bronze, tuned through careful alloy ratios, and designed not merely to ring, but to carry across distance. Their voices traveled farther than any spoken announcement, farther than any visual signal. When they sounded, entire communities listened. Church bells were among the earliest instruments of public time enforcement, not mechanical in precision at first, but social in authority. Their tones structured daily life, weaving individual routines into collective rhythm. In an age when few people owned clocks, bells functioned as shared timekeepers. Morning began not when one awoke naturally, but when the first bell called the day into motion. Its resonance rolled over rooftops, through open fields, along narrow streets, stirring farmers, merchants, artisans, and clergy alike. The body might still be heavy with sleep, but the bell did not negotiate. Its sound declared the day has begun. This was particularly powerful in monastic and religious communities where canonical hours, fixed prayer intervals, divided both day and night into sacred segments. Matins before dawn, lauds at sunrise, prime in early morning, sext at midday, vespers at dusk, compline before sleep. Each prayer time was announced by bell. These rings regulated not only devotion but biological rhythm. Monks rose in darkness when matins sounded, interrupting sleep for nocturnal worship. Over generations, such patterns reshaped sleep architecture, compressing rest into segmented intervals aligned with spiritual duty. Thus, bells influenced circadian rhythms as much as theology did. Even outside monasteries, lay communities absorbed this temporal structure. Though not obligated to attend every prayer, they heard the bells marking hours nonetheless. The sound imprinted temporal awareness subconsciously. Farmers adjusted fieldwork around them. Bakers timed ovens. Merchants opened stalls following morning peals. Evening bells signaled return home, closure of markets, preparation for rest. Sound became schedule. Unlike sundials or water clocks, which required visual attention, bells reached everyone simultaneously. Literate or not, indoors or outdoors, they democratized time awareness. A single ring could gather an entire town. Multiple bells often existed within one tower, each tuned differently. Specific sequences communicated distinct meanings. A slow toll might mark funerals. Rapid ringing signaled celebration or emergency. Pattern recognition became communal literacy. People learned not only to hear bells, but to interpret them. In this way, auditory physics merged with social coordination. The power behind bell ringing was mechanical but human-driven. Early bell ringers pulled ropes attached to massive clappers or swung entire bells within frames. Timing depended on manual effort, an individual responsible for punctuality. Later, mechanical clockworks were integrated into bell towers, automating strikes through gear-driven hammers. Here, the fusion of clockmaking and bell casting reached architectural scale. Pendulum, regulated clocks inside towers controlled when bells rang, extending mechanical time outward into civic life. Thus, the escapements tick within a tower translated into thunderous bronze resonance across valleys. Private precision became public authority. As towns grew, this synchronization grew more consequential. Markets required coordinated opening times. Legal courts convened at scheduled hours. Curfews were enforced through evening bells, signaling when citizens should return indoors. The term, curfew, itself originates from the French couvre, feu, cover fire, referring to the bell that signaled households to extinguish hearth flames for safety at night. So bells regulated not only time but risk. They managed sleep cycles too. Evening rings encouraged winding down. Night bells discouraged wandering. Dawn peals reactivated society. Over generations, communities internalized these rhythms. People began waking shortly before bells rang, their bodies entrained to communal sound cues. This phenomenon reflects what modern science calls social zeitgebers, external signals that synchronize biological clocks. Today, alarms and work schedules serve this function. Historically, bells perform the role their sound carry, de-emotional as well as temporal weight. A wedding peal lifted spirits across entire towns. A funeral toll slowed movement, encouraging solemn reflection. Victory rings sparked celebration. Fire alarms triggered urgency. Thus, bells encoded collective feeling alongside temporal information. They made time not just measurable, but experiential. Architecturally, bell towers were positioned deliberately. Central, elevated, acoustically optimized. Stone amplified resonance. Open belfries allowed sound to project unobstructed. Some bells were enormous, weighing several tons, requiring teams to install and maintain. Their casting was ceremonial, involving entire communities. Names were given. Blessings performed. People felt connected to their bells as civic symbols. When invaders seized towns, silencing bells often symbolized domination, disrupting temporal identity as much as political control. Inside towers, the physics of bell ringing created its own rhythms. When struck, the bell's metal vibrated in complex harmonic patterns. The fundamental tone carried distance, while overtones created richness. Each bell had a sonic fingerprint shaped by thickness, diameter, alloy, position. Bell founders, specialized metalworkers, tuned bells by shaving internal surfaces, adjusting resonance until desired pitch emerged. This meant time itself had tone. Different towns possessed different sonic identities. Travelers could recognize locations by bell sound alone. Night bells held particular psychological power. In darkness, sound travels farther. A midnight toll echoed across sleeping landscapes, marking hours few people could otherwise track. Insomniacs counted strikes, gauging sleeplessness. Night watchmen synchronized patrols to hourly rings. For some, these nocturnal bells were comforting, proof that order persisted while they slept. For others, especially during illness or grief, each toll felt heavy, reminding them of passing time. Still, the communal effect remained as society moved together. Bells reduced temporal fragmentation. Instead of individuals following isolated rhythms, entire populations aligned to shared auditory signals. This synchronization improved cooperation, essential in agrarian economies dependent on coordinated labor. Harvests required group effort. Irrigation schedules needed alignment. Religious festivals depended on unified participation. Bells orchestrated these complexities without written timetables. Their authority also extended into education. School hours were marked by bell ringing long before classroom clocks existed. Students arrived and departed according to tower signals, embedding punctuality from childhood. Thus, bell-regulated time gradually reshaped cultural attitudes. Lateness became noticeable. Absence became measurable. Obligation gained temporal boundaries. While earlier societies operated within flexible time atmospheres, bell synchronization introduced expectation, not yet industrial rigidity, but communal accountability. And yet, despite this structuring force, bells retained organic warmth absent in later mechanical enforcement. Their sound was resonant, human, atmospheric. Unlike shrill alarms or factory sirens, bells carried depth, their vibrations lingering, decaying slowly in air. Even enforcement arrived wrapped in musicality. This softened their psychological imposition. People did not feel ordered by machines, but guided by communal voice. In evenings, final bells, often marking compline, encouraged stillness. Shops closed, streets quieted, households gathered. Firelight replaced daylight. Sleep preparation became socially coordinated. In this way, bells bridged mechanical time and biological rest. They did not eliminate natural rhythms, but they layered communal structure atop them, aligning sleep, prayer, labor, and gathering into shared cadence. Over centuries, as personal clocks proliferated and industrial time discipline intensified, the bell's role shifted. Factory whistles, train schedules, and digital timekeeping assumed enforcement functions. Yet bells never disappeared. They still ring from cathedral towers, village churches, civic halls. Echoes of an era when time was not carried individually, but shared collectively through sound. Even today, hearing distant bells can evoke calm or nostalgia, a subconscious memory of synchronized living, of evenings shaped by resonance rather than notification. Because long before humanity wore time on wrists or checked it on screens, it listened for it in the air. And when those bronze voices rang out across fields and rooftops, they did more than mark hours. They gathered lives into rhythm. They synchronized sleep and waking. They taught communities slowly in sono, rustly, how to move together through the measured unfolding of the day. For centuries, time had lived outside the home. It rang from towers, cast shadows in public squares, dripped in temples, and burned in monasteries. People encountered it communally, as a shared structure imposed gently through bells, sunlight, and ritual. But there came a quiet turning point in human history when time crossed the threshold from public space into private life. It entered homes, and eventually it entered bedrooms. The arrival of domestic clocks marked more than a technological shift. It represented a psychological transformation, the moment when time ceased to be something people visited and became something that lived beside them. Early household clocks were objects of status as much as function. Mantel clocks rested above fireplaces, their polished wooden or gilded cases reflecting candlelight in warm interiors. Wall clocks hung in central rooms, visible to families gathered for meals, prayer, or evening conversation. Their presence signaled prosperity, education, and modernity. Owning a clock meant participating in a new temporal order, one where hours were no longer estimated but displayed continuously. Unlike church bells, which sounded at intervals, domestic clocks offered constant visual access to time. One could glance upward and see precisely how much of the evening remained, how long until dawn, how late the hour had grown. Time, once atmospheric, became numerical. The mechanical movements within these clocks, pendulums swinging, escapements ticking, gear trains turning, translated into hands gliding slowly across enamel faces marked with Roman or Arabic numerals. It was elegant, mesmerizing even. Families often gathered around new clocks in quiet fascination, watching the minute hand advance imperceptibly, listening to the steady tick-tock that filled rooms with rhythmic presence. At first, this presence was comforting. The sound suggested stability, continuity, order within the home. Much like a hearth fire or a breathing companion, the clock's rhythm became part of domestic soundscape. But as clocks migrated deeper into living spaces, their influence grew more intimate. They entered sleeping chambers. Bedrooms once governed almost entirely by natural cycles. Darkness, fatigue, temperature began accommodating mechanical timekeepers. Smaller clocks, sometimes spring-driven rather than weight-powered, were placed on bedside tables, dressers, or wall hooks near beds. Mantel clocks, too large for bedside use, inspired portable adaptations. Bracket clocks, carriage clocks, and eventually alarm clocks evolved to serve private temporal awareness. This marked a profound shift. Sleep, once guided by bodily cues and environmental darkness, became monitored. Individuals could now measure how long they slept, how long they lay awake, how many hours remained before obligations resumed. Midnight waking, once a natural segment of biphasic sleep, took on new psychological framing. Instead of rising calmly for reflection or prayer, individuals now saw the hour numerically displayed. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, awareness of time passing, while awake could induce restlessness, a subtle anxiety previously absent when duration was uncounted. The bedroom clock did not create insomnia, but it quantified it. Its ticking also transformed nighttime atmosphere. Where earlier nights were filled with irregular natural sounds, wind, settling timber, distant animals, the mechanical tick introduced uniform rhythm. For some his proved soothing. The repetitive cadence mirrored biological rhythms, heartbeat, breathing, encouraging relaxation. Many people reported falling asleep more easily with the gentle ticking nearby, as though lulled by mechanical reassurance. For others, however, the sound magnified wakefulness. Each tick marked time passing without sleep. The mind, attuned to the rhythm, found it difficult to ignore. What comforted one sleeper unsettled another. Clockmakers responded to this tension by developing quieter escapements, cushioned cases, and eventually silent mechanisms. But in early domestic settings, the tick remained prominent, an audible reminder that time continued whether one rested or not. The psychological intimacy of bedroom clocks extended beyond sleep monitoring. They shaped bedtime itself. Families began structuring evenings according to displayed hours rather than fading light alone. Bedtime emerged as a fixed concept, children sent to bed at designated times, adults retiring according to work schedules increasingly governed by mechanical precision. This synchronization aligned domestic life with broader industrializing societies, where punctuality gained economic importance. The bedroom clock thus became both private companion and disciplinary device. It enforced waking as much as resting. The invention of the alarm function intensified this role dramatically. Early alarm clocks used simple mechanical triggers, pins set into rotating discs that released bells when reached. Later designs incorporated dedicated alarm, springs powering louder ringing mechanisms. The first time an alarm sounded beside a sleeping person must have felt jarring. A mechanical command interrupting biological rhythm. Where church bells once called communities gently from sleep, alarm clocks addressed individuals directly, insistently. Waking shifted from communal cue to personal obligation. This change paralleled broader societal transformations. Urbanization, factory labor, rail travel, all required individuals to adhere to precise schedules. Bedroom clocks ensured compliance began at the most vulnerable moment, waking. Sleep, therefore, became bracketed by machines. Clocks marked when one lay down and when one rose. Over time, this monitoring influenced sleep behavior itself. People began calculating optimal sleep duration, planning bedtime backward from alarm times. Night became a resource to allocate efficiently, rather than an organic state to enter naturally. This cognitive framing persists today. Discussions of sleep debt, sleep tracking, and sleep efficiency all echo the bedroom clock's original monitoring function. Yet, despite this regulatory influence, domestic clocks retained aesthetic warmth. Craftsmen designed cases to harmonize with bedroom decor: carved wood, porcelain panels, brass finials. Some clocks incorporated painted scenes, lunar phase dials, or musical chimes marking quarter hours softly. These embellishments softened the machine's authority, embedding timekeeping within beauty. Couples sometimes synchronized bedside clocks as symbolic gestures, shared schedules reflecting shared lives. Families passed clocks down generations, their ticking linking ancestral time to present rest. Thus, the bedroom clock occupied emotional as well as functional space. It witnessed births, illnesses, sleepless nights, quiet conversations, final breaths. Its hands turned steadily through all of it, indifferent yet present. Technologically, miniaturization drove its expansion. Advances in spring metallurgy allowed clocks to operate without heavy descending weights, making them portable. Improved escapements increased accuracy. Compact gear trains fit within smaller housings. This portability accelerated time's intimacy. Travel clocks accompanied journeys. Soldiers carried pocket watches into wartime camps, regulating sleep under unfamiliar skies. Exploration expeditions depended on portable chronometers to maintain schedule in remote environments. Time followed humans wherever they rested. The bedroom was only the beginning, but it was the most psychologically transformative location. Because sleep represents humanity's most biologically governed state, to place a machine beside that state was to invite mechanical order into organic vulnerability. Over generations, this coexistence normalized. People stopped noticing the tick. They trusted alarms. They structured rest around displayed hours. Instinctive lie. The clock became less an intruder and more an extension of self, an externalized circadian regulator reinforcing societal expectation. Even today, though digital devices have replaced mechanical bedside clocks for many, the function remains identical. Screens glow where dials once shone. Electronic tones replace brass bells. But the intimacy persists: time beside the pillow, watching sleep, governing waking. Looking back, the transition feels quiet, almost invisible. No proclamation announced that time had entered the bedroom. No ceremony marked its arrival. It simply appeared, first on mantelpieces, then walls, then bedside tables, until one night humanity found itself falling asleep to the sound of ticking and waking to the sound of ringing. From that moment forward, sleep was never entirely private again. It was shared with a machine that never rested, never dreamed, and never stopped counting the passing of the night. Long after the mechanics of clocks had been refined, after pendulums learned to swing with elegant precision and escapements rationed energy into measured pulses, another influence began unfolding quietly, almost invisibly, not within the machinery itself, but within the human mind that lived beside it. It was the sound. Ticky-tock, tick-tock, a simple repetition, barely intrusive, often soft enough to dissolve into the background of domestic life. And yet, over time, this rhythmic sound began shaping psychological states in ways early clockmakers could never have predicted. Before mechanical clocks entered homes, nighttime soundscapes were irregular. Wind gusted unpredictably. Timber beams creaked as temperatures shifted. Animals called at uneven intervals. Fire crackled in fluctuating bursts. These sounds were organic, but they lacked rhythmic consistency. The brain registered them as environmental texture rather than structured pattern. The ticking clock introduced something new: mechanical regularity, a sound that repeated with near-perfect uniformity, a pulse independent of weather, mood, or biological need. At first, this rhythm felt novel, even mesmerizing. Families sitting in quiet rooms found themselves unconsciously synchronizing breathing to the cadence. Children watched pendulums swing while listening to the accompanying ticks, lulled into stillness. Repetition has long been known to influence neural activity. Though early societies lacked neurological vocabulary, they sensed intuitively that rhythmic stimuli could calm the mind. Chanting, drumming, rocking, and breathing exercises across cultures relied on repetitive cadence to induce trance, like relaxation. The ticking clock joined this lineage, an unintended instrument of mental entrainment. As people lay in bed at night, the tick-tock provided a steady auditory anchor. For some, it acted like a metronome guiding the descent into sleep. The brain, attuned to patterns, began matching internal rhythms, heart rate, breath pace, to the external beat. In this way, the ticking clock functioned as a protoform of what modern science calls white noise, or sound conditioning. Not because the sound was actually white noise. It was too distinct, too patterned, but because it masked irregular disturbances. Sudden sounds, a distant bark, a door shifting, wind pressing shutters, stood out less against the constant ticking backdrop. The brain, focused on the dominant rhythm, filtered peripheral noise more easily. Thus, ticking created auditory stability. But psychological responses to this stability were not uniform. For many, the clock's rhythm felt reassuring, a sonic proof that order persisted. Even in darkness, even in solitude, the steady pulse suggested continuity. Time was moving predictably. The world had not stopped. This reassurance paralleled the comfort. Some people feel listening to a sleeping partner's breathing or their own heartbeat. The clock became a companion presence, mechanical, yes, but dependable. In households where pendulum clocks stood in hallways, their sound traveled softly into bedrooms, echoing through floorboards and door frames. The distance softened the sharpness, transforming tick-tock into a muffled, cradle-like rhythm. Writers from the 18th and 19th centuries occasionally described falling asleep to these distant mechanical pulses, comparing them to waves against a shore or footsteps fading into mist. Yet for others, the same sound evoked unease. Repetition, when perceived consciously rather than subconsciously, can heighten awareness rather than soothe it. Insomniacs often reported that ticking magnified wakefulness. Each second counted aloud made sleeplessness feel longer, heavier. The mind, instead of entraining to the rhythm, resisted it. Tick-s, till awake. Talk still awake. Minutes stretched because they were audibly measured. This dual psychological effect, comfort versus anxiety, depended largely on attention. When ticking dissolved into background, it calmed. When it moved to foreground awareness, it agitated. This phenomenon aligns with modern understandings of sensory gating, the brain's ability to filter repetitive stimuli, unless attention fixates on them. A ticking clock could therefore act either as lullaby or tormentor depending on mental state. Writers, philosophers, and poets often used ticking as metaphor precisely because of its psychological potency. It symbolized inevitability, time moving forward regardless of human desire. In quiet rooms, the sound could feel existential, reminding listeners of mortality's steady approach. In moments of grief, ticking amplified absence, a mechanical persistence contrasting emotional stillness. Conversely, in peaceful domestic settings, the same sound reinforced coziness, evenings by firelight, pages turning slowly, tea cooling beside rhythmic time. Context shaped perception. Interestingly, the ticking clock also influenced concentration. In studies conducted centuries later, researchers observed that moderate rhythmic sound can improve focus in certain individuals, particularly when tasks require sustained attention, but minimal creative fluctuation. The clock's steady beat provided temporal scaffolding, a subtle pacing mechanism helping the brain regulate cognitive flow. This effect mirrored the metronome's role in music practice, guiding tempo consistency. Thus, ticking affected not only sleep but waking productivity. Its presence trained humans to think in measured intervals, to internalize seconds as experiential units rather than abstract divisions. Children raised in clock-filled homes developed temporal awareness earlier than those in purely natural environments. They learned to estimate duration by sound, knowing instinctively how long a minute felt because they had heard 60 ticks countless times. Time entered cognition acoustically. Over generations, this shaped cultural pacing. Speech rhythms, work habits, even walking cadence subtly aligned with mechanical time exposure. Industrial societies, saturated with ticking clocks, developed faster, more segmented behavioral tempos than agrarian ones, yet despite its structuring influence, the ticking clock retained its intimate emotional resonance. In quiet libraries, its sound suggested scholarly patience. In sick rooms, it marked vigil hours beside beds. In drawing rooms, it accompanied conversation pauses. Its neutrality allowed projection. People heard what their emotional state translated. As technology evolved, clockmakers experimented with altering ticking characteristics. Some escapements produced sharper ticks, others softer pulses. Case materials affected acoustic resonance. Wooden housings dampened sound, metal amplified it. Later, silent sweep. Mechanisms eliminated ticking altogether, replacing discrete steps with continuous hand motion driven by smoother gear transitions. Yet many people resisted silent clocks. Without ticking, time felt strangely absent, visually present but acoustically void. The silence removed the subconscious reassurance of continuity. This reveals how deeply ticking had embedded itself into psychological expectation. Even in modern environments saturated with electronic noise, some individuals use recordings of ticking clocks as sleep aids, digital recreations of mechanical rhythm. The sound persists as therapeutic tool centuries after its accidental introduction into domestic life. There is also neurological fascination in how simple repetition affects brainwave states. Slow, consistent auditory stimuli can encourage alpha and theta wave activity, frequencies associated with relaxation, meditation, and pre-sleep transition. While clockmakers never designed escapements with neuroacoustics in mind, their creations inadvertently contributed to these states. The tick-tock became a sonic bridge between waking cognition and dreaming mind. In literature and cinema, ticking often underscores tension, countdowns, suspense, approaching deadlines. This dramatic usage draws from the same psychological root, repetition focusing attention on passing time. But in quiet bedrooms away from narrative urgency, ticking returns to gentler meaning. It becomes presence without demand, a companion that neither speaks nor judges, only marks. If one listens closely to a mechanical clock at night, truly listens, the sound reveals layered textures. The initial tick of escapement release, the faint reverberation within the case, the soft mechanical settling before the next impulse. It is less a single sound than a repeating mechanical breath. And perhaps this is why it affects the mind so profoundly. Humans are rhythmic beings. Our hearts beat. Our lungs expand. Our steps alternate. We exist within biological oscillations. The ticking clock mirrors these patterns externally, a mechanical reflection of internal life. When harmony occurs, comfort follows. When discord arises, when the mind is restless, anxious, sleepless, the same rhythm can feel intrusive, highlighting imbalance rather than soothing it. Thus, the psychological effect of ticking is not fixed. It is relational, shaped by mood, attention, environment, and cultural conditioning. Yet whether comforting or unsettling, its influence remains undeniable. Because once mechanical clocks entered human spaces, time was no longer only seen or scheduled. It was heard, audibly, persistently, intimately, shaping thought patterns, sleep transitions, emotional atmospheres, and the very way humans came to experience the passing of moments. Tick by measured tick, the mind learned to live inside mechanical rhythm. Sometimes soothed by it, sometimes haunted by it, but never entirely chid by the sound of physics becoming audible in the quiet rooms of human life. Before the rise of industry, human time still retained traces of elasticity. Even as clocks had entered homes, even as church bells synchronized communities, much of daily life remained tethered to environmental rhythm. Sunrise beginning labor, dusk inviting rest, seasons expanding or compressing effort. Time was measured more precisely than in ancient eras, but it was not yet absolute. Then came the Industrial Revolution, not as a sudden event, but as a gathering force that slowly, then decisively, re-engineered humanity's relationship with time. At its heart was a simple demand coordination. Factories required workers to arrive simultaneously. Machines functioned best when operated continuously. Production schedules depended on predictable labor input. Unlike agricultural work, which flexed around weather and daylight, industrial systems demanded constancy, and so mechanical time, once a guide, became an authority. One of the most symbolic sounds of this transformation was the factory whistle. Where sunrise had once stirred bodies awake, light filtering through shutters, birds calling from rooftops, now a piercing mechanical shriek cut through morning air. Loud, metallic, impossible to ignore, the whistle did not gently invite wakefulness. It commanded it. Workers rose not when rested, but when summoned. The whistle established a new dawn, artificial and forcible, synchronized. Entire towns began structuring their mornings around its call. Streets filled simultaneously with laborers walking toward mill gates. Windows lit at uniform hours. Breakfasts were shortened to meet punctuality demands. Biological waking was replaced by mechanical obligation. This shift represented one of the first large-scale subordinations of human circadian rhythm to industrial necessity. Inside factories, time discipline intensified further. Clocks hung prominently on walls, visible to supervisors and workers alike. Entry times were recorded. Late arrivals penalized. Break durations fixed. Output measured against hours worked. Time became currency. Quantified, purchased, controlled. Previously, labor had been task-oriented. One worked until fields were plowed or harvest gathered. Now it became duration-oriented. One worked for prescribed hours, regardless of immediate task complete. This inversion reshaped psychological experience profoundly. Workers learned to pace effort not by bodily energy but by clock segments. Fatigue could not end a shift. Hunger did not determine breaks. Mechanical schedules overrode organic signals. The human body, evolved for flexibility, was being trained toward rigidity. Factories also extended work beyond daylight through artificial illumination, gas lamps, later electric lighting. Production no longer paused at sunset. Night shifts emerged, requiring workers to invert natural sleep cycles. Shift work represented one of the most biologically disruptive consequences of industrial time discipline. Humans, diurnal by evolutionary design, found themselves laboring through darkness and attempting sleep during daylight hours. Circadian rhythms, governed by light exposure, struggled to adapt. Melatonin production misaligned. Cortisol cycles destabilized. Sleep became fragmented, shallow, insufficient. Workers reported chronic fatigue, irritability, digestive disturbance, early indicators of what modern science now recognizes as circadian disruption. Yet industrial economies depended on such schedules. Machinery was expensive. Idle equipment meant lost profit. Rotating shifts maximized output, ensuring factories operated nearly continuously. Human biology was expected to accommodate mechanical efficiency. Living environments adapted accordingly. Industrial towns developed around mills and plants, their soundscapes dominated by whistles, steam releases, jeer clatter. Night was no longer quiet. Production noise bled into sleep hours, further fragmenting rest. Housing proximity to workplaces intensified this effect. Workers often lived within walking distance of factories, meaning industrial sound permeated domestic life. Sleep, once governed by environmental silence and darkness, now competed with mechanical intrusion. Time discipline also altered meal patterns. Instead of eating when hungry, workers ate when breaks allowed. Lunchtimes were fixed, often brief. Digestive systems adjusted uneasily to enforced scheduling rather than metabolic cues. Even childhood rhythms shifted. Children employed in factories, a grim reality of early industrialization, adopted adult schedules prematurely. Long hours under artificial light replaced outdoor play, and sunlight exposure essential for healthy development. Their sleep patterns mirrored adult shift structures, embedding circadian strain from early age. School systems later adopted factory-like time discipline as well. Bells signaling class transitions, fixed start times aligning with parental work schedules. Thus, industrial time discipline extended generationally. Beyond physical effects, psychological restructuring unfolded. Punctuality became moralized. Being on time signified responsibility, diligence, respect. Tardiness implied laziness or unreliability. This moral framing reinforced compliance. Workers internalized time discipline not merely as requirement but as virtue. Personal identity began aligning with temporal obedience. A profound cultural shift from agrarian societies, where flexibility signified wisdom rather than irresponsibility. The phrase, "time is money," popularized by Benjamin Franklin, captured this new ideology succinctly. Time lost equaled profit lost. Leisure became compartmentalized. Evenings, Sundays, designated holidays. Rest was scheduled rather than interwoven with labor organically. This compartmentalization reshaped sleep perception as well. Sleep was increasingly viewed as recovery time, necessary to restore productivity, rather than holistic biological state integrated with lifestyle. Industrial medicine even measured worker output relative to sleep duration, seeking optimal rest to labor ratios for efficiency. Thus, sleep itself became instrumentalized. Railways intensified time discipline further. Train schedules required precise synchronization across regions. Standardized time zones emerged to coordinate departures and arrivals. Clocks in stations, factories, and offices were calibrated to uniform reference times. This synchronization extended industrial discipline beyond workplaces into national temporal structure. No longer did towns follow local solar noon. They followed railway time, standardized, mechanical, universal. Workers adjusted accordingly. Night shift rotations added additional strain. Rotating schedules, days one week, nights the next, prevented circadian stabilization entirely. Bodies could not adapt to consistent light-dark cycles. Sleep deprivation accumulated. Industrial accident rates correlated strongly with such fatigue. Machinery demanded alertness, yet workers operated under biological misalignment. Early labor reform movements recognized these dangers, advocating reduced hours, safer shifts, and rest protections. The "Our Day" campaign emerged from these tensions: 8 hours work, 8 hours rest, 8 hours leisure, an attempt to rebalance human time within industrial systems. But even this reform retained mechanical structuring. Sleep was allocated, not naturally entered. Factories also introduced time tracking technologies, punch clocks recording entry and exit. Workers stamped cards marking presence down to minutes. This bureaucratization deepened time surveillance. No longer did supervisors simply observe attendance, machines documented it. Temporal compliance became measurable data. In psychological terms, this created what scholars later called time anxiety, persistent awareness of being monitored against schedule. Workers began carrying this awareness home, structuring personal activities around impending shifts. Sleep became anticipatory, shaped by alarm setting, commute calculation, next day obligations. Dreaming itself was affected. Historical accounts describe factory workers dreaming of machinery rhythms. Gears turning, looms clattering. evidence of cognitive imprinting from repetitive labor environments. The mechanical world infiltrated subconscious imagery. Urbanization compounded circadian disruption. Gas street lighting extended social activity into night hours. Entertainment venues, theaters, taverns, dance halls, operated later, compressing sleep opportunity further. Industrial capitalism valued productivity by day and consumption by night. Rest receded. Even architecture adapted to time discipline. Factory housing blocks were built for efficiency rather than comfort. Small rooms, thin walls, limited ventilation. Environments not conducive to restorative sleep. Air pollution from coal-powered industry darkened skies, reducing natural light cues essential for circadian regulation. Workers often awoke to artificial illumination rather than sunrise. Thus, environmental zigzags, sunlight, temperature fluctuation, silence, weakened. Mechanical cues replaced them: whistles, alarms, shift rotations. Over decades, human biology bent, not perfectly, but sufficiently, to accommodate industrial demands. Sleep shortened. Polyphasic rest disappeared in favor of consolidated blocks aligned to work shift. Napping, once common in agrarian societies, became stigmatized as laziness. Efficiency replaced adaptability, yet resistance persisted. Labor unions fought for weekends, uninterrupted rest periods restoring circadian balance. Night shift premiums acknowledged biological hardship. Factory lighting reforms attempted to mimic daylight spectra. These interventions recognized, implicitly, that human biology could not be indefinitely subordinated to mechanical time without consequence. Modern chronobiology now confirms what early workers felt instinctively. Circadian disruption correlates with cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, mood disturbance, and reduced lifespan. Industrial time discipline reshaped civilization, but not without physiological cost. And yet, it also enabled unprecedented coordination, mass production, global trade, technological acceleration. The same temporal rigidity that strained sleep allowed societies to build rail networks, power grids, communication systems. Humanity traded biological harmony for mechanical capability. Today, remnants of industrial time discipline remain deeply embedded. Alarm clocks still replace sunrise for millions. Shift work persists in healthcare, transportation, manufacturing. Office schedules mirror factory models despite digital flexibility. Even remote workers often structure days around inherited industrial time blocks. The whistle may have softened into electronic tones, but its authority lingers. Looking back across this transformation, one sees not merely technological evolution but biological negotiation. A centuries-long process in which human sleep, wakefulness, and hormonal rhythm were gradually reshaped to align with machines that never required rest. The Industrial Revolution did not eliminate natural time, but it subordinated it. Sunrise still occurs, but many wake before it. Darkness still invites sleep, but artificial light delays it. Bodies still seek circadian balance, yet schedules fragment it. Human biology learned to bend, imperfectly, resiliently, around mechanical expectation, and in the echo of every factory whistle, every shift rotation, every alarm ringing before dawn, one can still hear the moment when time discipline rose above the horizon, replacing the gentle authority of the sun with the sharp command of industry, and ushering humanity into an age where sleep itself became subject to the clock. For most of human history, time belonged to place. Each town, each city, each village lived by its own sun. Noon was not defined by a universal agreement, but by a local celestial event. The moment the sun reached its highest point in that specific sky. Sundials aligned to regional longitude, and mechanical clocks were set accordingly. This meant time shifted subtly from one settlement to the next. Travel east or west, and noon arrived earlier or later by minutes. Over short distances, the difference was negligible. But across wider regions, the divergence became noticeable, even inconvenient. Yet for centuries, this variability posed little problem. Travel was slow. Communication slower. A traveler on horseback did not require synchronized time between towns separated by days of journey. Agricultural societies functioned comfortably within local solar rhythm. Time was personal to geography. Then came the railways. With the expansion of rail networks in the 19th century, humanity encountered a new logistical reality. Machines moving faster than traditional timekeeping systems could accommodate. Trains operated on strict schedules. Departures and arrivals needed coordination across vast distances. A delay in one town affected connections in another. But local solar time made such coordination chaotic. If one city's noon differed by 10 minutes from another's, train timetables became unreliable. Passengers missed connections. Freight deliveries faltered. Safety risks emerged when rail traffic shared tracks without synchronized scheduling. Railways demanded something unprecedented: uniform time. At first, railway companies attempted internal solutions. They created railway time, standardized clocks used exclusively within their networks, independent of local municipal time. Stations displayed railway time prominently. Conductors synchronized watches before departure. Telegraph systems transmitted time signals along tracks to maintain alignment. But this dual time system created confusion. Towns still followed solar time, while trains followed railway time. Public clocks disagreed with station clocks. Travelers had to convert between systems. As rail networks expanded, the inefficiency became unsustainable. Pressure mounted for broader standardization. The solution required redefining humanity's relationship with the planet's rotation. Earth rotates 360 degrees every 24 hours. This yields 15 degrees of longitude per hour. From this physical fact emerged the concept of time zones. Longitudinal bands sharing uniform clock time. Instead of each town following its own solar noon, entire regions would adopt a common reference. This proposal transformed time from local observation into global agreement. In 1884, the International Meridian Conference convened in Washington, D.C., bringing representatives from multiple nations together to formalize the system. They selected the Greenwich Meridian in England as the prime longitudinal reference, 2 degrees. From this line, time zones radiated east and west in hourly increments. Greenwich Mean Time (GMT) became the global baseline. Countries adjusted local clocks to align with their assigned zone offsets, GMT FUFA1, GMT 5, and so forth. For the first time, the planet's surface was divided not only by geography, but by synchronized temporal grids. Railways could now operate reliably across continents. A train departing London at 10:00 would arrive in Paris according to a predictable offset, rather than ambiguous local solar difference. Telegraphy reinforced this coordination. Time signals transmitted electrically allowed observatories to calibrate clocks with unprecedented precision. Cities adjusted tower clocks simultaneously. Maritime navigation improved through standardized chronometer reference. Physics, specifically Earth's rotational mechanics, became the foundation of human scheduling. The planet itself was now the master clock. Standardized time zones also enabled global commerce expansion. Shipping routes, financial markets, and communication systems required synchronized operation across oceans. Banking transactions, commodity trading, and diplomatic correspondence all depended on agreed temporal frameworks. Time was no longer regional. It became planetary infrastructure. This coordination reshaped daily life in subtle but profound ways. People living thousands of miles apart now shared synchronized hours despite experiencing daylight at different solar positions. Noon on the clock no longer guaranteed the sun overhead. Time detached from direct celestial observation. It became abstract, defined by agreement rather than perception. This abstraction intensified industrial time discipline. Factories aligned operations with standardized time rather than local daylight. Offices scheduled meetings across regions. Postal systems optimized delivery routes through synchronized dispatching. Even personal correspondence adapted. letters noting sending time relative to shared zones. Globalization accelerated. Telecommunication technologies, telephone, radio, later television, depended on synchronized broadcasting schedules. Programs aired simultaneously across regions aligned by time zone. International events, Olympic Games, politics, broadcasts, financial announcements, required coordinated global timing. Human attention itself began synchronizing at planetary scale. A speech delivered in one hemisphere could be heard live in another, made possible by standardized temporal alignment. Aviation further entrenched time zone necessity. Flights crossing continents and oceans required precise scheduling relative to departure and arrival zones. Pilots navigated not only geography but temporal shifts. Jet lag, the physiological effect of rapid time zone crossing, revealed the biological cost of planetary synchronization. Human circadian rhythms evolved to adjust gradually through solar cues, struggled when transported instantly across longitudinal bands. Sleep cycles destabilized. Hormonal rhythms misaligned. Cognitive performance fluctuated. Standardized time exposed the tension between planetary coordination and biological limitation. The more humanity synchronized globally, the more individuals experienced circadian dislocation. Daylight saving time added further complexity. Introduced to maximize daylight utilization, clocks were shifted seasonally, advancing or retreating by 1 hour. This artificial adjustment aimed to conserve energy and extend evening productivity. But it also disrupted sleep cycles, forcing bodies to re-adapt twice yearly. Here again, mechanical scheduling overrode solar constancy. Despite these challenges, standardized time zones enabled unprecedented human collaboration. Scientific research required synchronized observations across observatories worldwide. Astronomers coordinated telescope use. Meteorologists tracked storms across hemispheres using unified temporal data. Global positioning systems later relied on atomic clock synchronization within satellites. Microsecond precision ensuring navigation accuracy. Timekeeping advanced from pendulum regulation to atomic oscillation, measuring duration through cesium atom vibration frequencies. The planet was now mapped not only spatially but temporally with extraordinary exactness. Digital networks further extended this coordination. Internet servers synchronize via network time protocols, NTP, aligning computers worldwide to atomic clock standards. Financial markets execute trades in milliseconds across continents. Human activity operates within a temporal mesh spanning the globe. Yet despite technological precision, the physical foundation remains simple: Earth's rotation. One spin every 24 hours. Physics shaping planetary rhythm. Time zones are therefore less arbitrary than they appear. They are human interpretations of astronomical mechanics. Attempts to harmonize social systems with planetary motion. Still, the harmonization is imperfect. Political borders rarely align neatly with longitudinal divisions. Some nations adopt single time zones, despite vast geographic breadth, prioritizing administrative unity over solar accuracy. Others create fractional offsets, GMT 5 and 30, GMT plus 9 and 30, reflecting regional compromise. Time thus becomes geopolitical as well as physical. The psychological effect of living within standardized zones differs from local solar time as well. People internalize clock noon, even when sunlight disagrees. Daily routines follow societal scheduling rather than direct environmental cues. Urban dwellers may rarely observe solar position at all, navigating time purely through devices. The sky's authority diminishes. Clocks replace celestial observation, yet there remains a quiet continuity. When midnight arrives simultaneously across a zone, fireworks erupt, celebrations begin, communities experience synchronized transition. New Year's Eve exemplifies planetary rhythm shaped by time zones. The new year travels westward hour by hour, celebrated sequentially across Earth's rotation. Human festivity mirrors planetary spin. Thus, standardized time zones do not eliminate natural rhythm, they reorganize it at larger scale. From local solar time to regional clock time to global atomic time, humanity has progressively abstracted temporal experience while remaining tethered to physical law. Railways initiated this transformation. Their demand for synchronized scheduling catalyzed planetary temporal unification. Without trains, time zones might have emerged far later. Without telegraphs, synchronization would have lagged. Without industrial coordination needs, local solar time might still dominate. But once mechanical speed compressed geography, temporal standardization became inevitable. Today, crossing time zones is routine. Flights traverse multiple zones within hours. Digital meetings connect participants across hemispheres. Financial markets open and close. N-coordinated sequence around the globe. Human civilization operates as a temporally synchronized organism, each region activating and resting in rotational succession. Morning in Tokyo overlaps evening in London. Afternoon in New York aligns with midnight in Delhi. The planet hums with staggered wakefulness. And underlying this vast coordination lies the same physical truth that guided ancient sundials. Earth turns. Time passes because the planet rotates through sunlight. Standardized time zones represent humanity's most ambitious attempt to map social rhythm onto planetary motion, to transform celestial mechanics into civic order. Physics shaping planetary rhythm, not through pendulums alone nor gears, nor escapements, but through the alignment of billions of lives to the turning of a world spinning silently in space. Each rotation marking another day shared, synchronized, and measured across the vast, interconnected expanse of human time. Time is still being measured. It has never stopped being measured. But the way it is experienced, the way it is felt inside the human body, has changed more in the last century than in the thousands of years before it. For most of mechanical history, time had presence. It swung, it ticked, it chimed. Pendulums traced visible arcs through the air. Escapements spoke in patient pulses. Gear trains turned in hidden but audible continuity. Even when unseen, clocks announced themselves through rhythm. You did not need to look at time to know it was there. You could hear it breathing in the room. But in the modern world, that sensory relationship has thinned and almost vanished. Screens replaced pendulums. Where once brass hands moved across enamel faces, now digital numerals shift silently on illuminated displays. Smartphones glow beside pillows. Laptops sit open on desks. Smartwatches vibrate faintly rather than tick. Time is still precise, more precise than ever, but it is no longer embodied. It is abstracted into light. This transformation began with quartz technology in the 20th century. Instead of regulating time through oscillating pendulums or balance wheels, quartz clocks use vibrating crystals powered by electricity. A quartz crystal, when energized, oscillates at a stable frequency, often 32,768 vibrations per second. Electronic circuits count these oscillations and convert them into seconds, minutes, hours. It is extraordinarily accurate, but it is silent. The oscillation happens invisibly, inaudibly, inside sealed circuitry. Hands, if present, may move in discrete steps, but even that ticking is often softened or eliminated. Digital displays remove movement altogether. Time appears as static digits that change instantaneously, rather than flowing continuously. This shift alters psychological perception subtly but profoundly. Mechanical clocks allowed people to witness time passing. You could see the minute hand creeping forward, feel duration unfolding physically. Digital time presents moments as isolated snapshots. 10:14 becomes 10:15 without visible transition. Continuity disappears. Time feels less like a river and more like a sequence of stepping stones. The loss of audible rhythm compounds this effect. Without ticking, the ambient presence of time fades. Rooms become acoustically neutral again, filled with environmental noise rather than mechanical cadence. As clocks grew more precise, humanity learned to measure time with astonishing accuracy, from pendulums and gears to satellites and atomic vibrations. Yet through every innovation, One truth remained unchanged. The human body never became mechanical. It still follows the sun more than the screen, darkness more than digits, rhythm more than schedules. So as the world continues to tick, ring, buzz, and glow around you, remember that rest is not wasted time. It is repair. It is balance. It is the quiet space where your ancient biological clock gently resets itself. Tonight, let the machines keep counting. You don't have to. Close your eyes, slow your breathing, and allow yourself to drift back into the natural rhythm your body has always known. Some celebrate this silence. Bedrooms free of ticking allow deeper rest for those sensitive to repetitive sound. But others feel the absence subconsciously. Without the clock's heartbeat, night becomes temporally unensured. Time passes without sensory confirmation. One must look at a screen to know the hour rather than feel it moving. This encourages more visual checking, more glances at illuminated devices, especially during sleeplessness. And here another consequence emerges. Screens do not merely display time, they emit light. Artificial light, especially blue spectrum light common in LEDs and phone displays, interferes directly with human circadian biology. For millions of years, the human brain regulated sleep-wake cycles through solar light cues. As dusk deepened, melatonin production increased, preparing the body for rest. Firelight and candlelight, warm in color temperature, minimally disrupted this hormonal process. Screens are different. Their cool spectrum light suppresses melatonin release, delaying sleep onset. Exposure before bedtime confuses the brain's internal clock, signaling wakefulness when rest should begin. Thus, modern timekeeping devices do more than measure time. They actively reshape biological rhythm. Checking the hour on a glowing phone at midnight does not simply inform the mind, it stimulates it. The body, ancient in design, misreads this artificial daylight as environmental mourning, sleep fragments, circadian cycles drift. Yet despite technological transformation, the human body remains fundamentally unchanged. Our biological clocks, governed by the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain, still respond primarily to solar cues. Hormonal rhythms still align with dawn and dusk. Core body temperature still fluctuates according to ancestral patterns shaped long before electricity. In this sense, humans live in two temporal systems simultaneously. One is digital, precise, instantaneous, globally synchronized. The other is biological, slow, cyclical, solar-tuned. Conflict arises when these systems misalign. Late night screen use delays sleep while early alarms demand waking. Shift work disrupts light exposure patterns. Global connectivity encourages activity across traditional night hours. The body resists, but modern schedules persist. Without audible clocks, many people no longer experience time as rhythm, but as pressure. Deadlines approach silently until screens announce them. Notifications replace ticking. Abrupt, irregular, attention demanding. The gentle cadence of mechanical time has given way to the fragmented alerts of digital time. Psychologically, this alters temporal stress. Ticking reminded people that time passed steadily, predictably. Notifications create urgency spikes, sudden reminders rather than continuous awareness. This fragmentation contributes to anxiety, as time feels discontinuous and reactive rather than flowing. Some individuals, sensing this loss, intentionally reintroduce mechanical rhythm into their environments. Analog clocks are purchased for aesthetic and psychological comfort. Metronome apps simulate ticking for focus. White noise machines include clock sounds among sleep aids. There is nostalgia, yes, but also neurological resonance. The human mind appears to benefit from steady, low-intensity rhythmic stimuli. This may explain why train travel, with its repetitive track sounds, induces drowsiness, or why rocking motions soothe infants. Mechanical clocks once provided similar sensory grounding within homes. Digital silence removed it. Yet modern timekeeping also brought extraordinary advantages. Atomic clocks measure time with precision unimaginable to pendulum engineers. GPS navigation depends on nanosecond accuracy. Global communications synchronize instantaneously. Medical technology schedules surgeries, monitors vital rhythms, administers medication timing, all reliant on digital temporal precision. The cost, however, is experiential detachment. We know time more accurately than ever, but feel it less intimately. There is also the phenomenon of temporal acceleration perception. Digital environments encourage multitasking, rapid information consumption, constant engagement. Hours pass unnoticed while staring at screens, only to feel suddenly lost. Mechanical clocks with visible and audible progression anchored awareness more continuously. Their absence contributes to what psychologists call time compression, the sensation that days vanish quickly without memorable markers. Body time, in contrast, remains cyclical. Hunger rises predictably. Sleepiness deepens at night. Energy peaks mid-morning, dips mid-afternoon. When aligned with natural light exposure, these rhythms produce well-being. When overridden by digital schedules, misalignment manifests as fatigue, irritability, metabolic strain. Chronobiology research consistently demonstrates that respecting biological timing improves health outcomes. Regular sleep hours, morning sunlight exposure, evening light reduction. In essence, the body still seeks ancient cycles. Sunrise still matters neurologically. Darkness still signals restoration. No technological advancement has replaced these biological truths. Even astronauts aboard space stations, orbiting Earth every 90 minutes, simulate day-night cycles artificially to maintain circadian stability. The need is that fundamental. Modern architecture increasingly acknowledges this. Circadian lighting systems adjust indoor illumination temperature throughout the day, mimicking solar progression. Blue light filters activate on devices at night. Sleep tracking technologies aim to align schedules with biological signals. Ironically, technology now attempts to restore what earlier technology disrupted. There is also philosophical reflection in this modern legacy. Mechanical clocks once externalized biological rhythm, pendulums echoing heartbeats. Digital clocks internalize nothing. They present time abstractly without sensory mediation. This abstraction distances humans from temporal embodiment. We schedule life down to minutes while often feeling disconnected from the passage itself. Yet, despite this detachment, ancient cycles endure quietly beneath digital overlays. People still feel sleepy when night deepens, regardless of screen glow. Jet lag still occurs despite perfect timekeeping devices. Seasonal affective disorder still arises when sunlight diminishes. The body remembers what culture sometimes forgets. We are solar creatures living in digital time. This duality defines modern temporal experience. We wake to alarms set by atomic precision, yet our energy depends on whether we saw sunrise. We schedule sleep by clock, yet its quality depends on darkness exposure. We measure productivity by hours logged, yet cognitive performance allows biological peaks independent of schedule. Thus, the modern legacy of timekeeping is not simply technological evolution. It is negotiation between visible and invisible rhythm, between measurable duration and felt experience, between screens that display time and bodies that live it. In quiet moments, perhaps during power outages when digital displays go dark, one might notice how differently time feels. Without glowing numerals, awareness softens. One senses duration through breath, hunger, fatigue, sky color, ancient cues resurfacing. It is a brief return to embodied temporality. But when electricity resumes, screens relight, digits reappear, and mechanical silence settles once more. Time continues, precise, synchronized, efficient. Yet beneath that precision, human biology still listens for older signals. The slow dimming of evening light, the coolness before dawn, the rhythmic rise and fall of breath in sleep, reminders that no matter how advanced our clocks become, the deepest measure of time remains written not in circuitry or quartz oscillation, but in the ancient, cyclical physiology that still turns quietly inside every human body. tuned, as it always has been, to the slow engineering of the sun.